Lately, there seems to be a lot of confusion about political labels. What policies are left-wing or right-wing? Why do some people call liberals socialist and others use the word neoliberal to refer to conservative policies? In order to understand the basics, join me for a brief explainer on political ideology. Our story begins with the French Revolution during the summer of 1789. A big part of the French Revolt had to do with the rethinking of royal prerogatives. And maybe the biggest issue was a discussion about whether the king should have an absolute veto or not. Without microphones, and to make a little bit more sense of a chaotic scene, those in the assembly opted to seat themselves in distinct groups. Those who thought royal power should remain absolute sat on the right, and those who didn't, which at the time was the more radical position, sat on the left. This pattern continued more or less throughout the revolutionary period and was reported that way. Over time, the terms became loosely associated with those that wanted to maintain tradition or the social status quo for the right and those who did not for the left. Then, during the Russian Revolution of 1917, the terms were further refined. The leader of the revolution, Vladimir Lenin, took Karl Marx's theory about social change, that whole bit about how communism was inevitable as a result of class struggle, and added a socialist stage. That is, according to Lenin, for a world in which there would be no classes, private property, nor states to exist, or basically for communism to develop, it was first necessary to bring about socialism. In Lenin's telling, this meant that a vanguard party should seize power on behalf of workers in a given place and would make the state the owner of the means of production or nationalization. This collectivism would eventually result in a dictatorship of the proletariat, which would lead to a withering away of the state. As Marxism-Leninism became the official ideology of the Soviet Union, the left became associated with those who supported more state intervention in the economy, and the right with those who opposed it. It was during this period that these descriptors entered common usage in the United States, and their meanings acquired the connotation that is used today. Notice then where the basic parameters of our political spectrum lie. Generally speaking, the right holds tradition in high regard. They value social mores and believe strongly that they should not be done away with lightly. Therefore, they support government upholding a traditional moral order and, if necessary, government interfering to preserve the status quo. Thus, they champion traditional gender roles legislation, prefer regulations that uphold the dominant religion and in-group, back native language-only laws, and advocate for policies against vice, such as the use of drugs, gambling, pornography, etc. The left is the opposite. They do not want government to police morality, hence they support same-sex marriage, decriminalization of drugs, legalization of abortion, and so on. So again, for the right, the government can and should interfere in society as it relates to social issues. The opposite is true for the left. Meanwhile, these positions are reversed when it comes to economic issues. In general, the left advocates for the government to interfere in the economy, whether to support the poor, the middle class, or their idea of the public good. They strongly prefer the taxing of the rich and the subsidizing of the needy, whether that is with a social safety measure such as food stamps, social security, or aid to go to college. The right basically always opposes the raising of the minimum wage, and some argue it should not exist at all. And in general, they oppose any kind of tax, but especially those that might be distributive. Markets, they think, are the answer, and if government interferes with them, they are bound to screw up. Notice, though, that both the left and the right want government intervention, just on different issues, and as one moves through the left-right axis, government never goes away. Its attention just shifts. There are, however, people who distrust all authority and want no government intervention at all, whether on social or economic issues. The label for these people is libertarianism or anarchism, depending on the extent to which they want to abolish capitalism along with the state. Given their skepticism of government, however, libertarian or anarchist political parties either do not exist in most political systems, or when they do, are rarely successful. Having clarified the political spectrum, let me deal with the other words associated with ideology. The words conservative and liberal. The word conservative as a political term also originated in France. It was first used in 1818 during the Bourbon Restoration, and because it was employed to describe the process of trying to roll back the policies of the French Revolution, it was always associated with right-wing politics. The word liberal is more complicated. It originally referred to individual liberty, and then to those who supported the theories of Adam Smith and David Ricardo regarding free trade and little government intervention in the economy. It was not used as a political label until the Spanish fighting for the implementation of the 1812 Constitution in Spain gave it to themselves. Meanwhile, in the US, people on the left side of the spectrum were not called liberal until the Great Depression. In the decades before that time, they used the progressive label. But as FDR began his New Deal and promoted the idea of the four freedoms, which included massive interference in the economy, the word became associated with the left. In other parts of the world, especially Europe, however, the term has been associated with the classical liberalism of David Ricardo. Thus, the Liberals in Sweden are actually right-wing, and the main right-wing party in Australia is called the Liberal Party. Finally, notice how within the political spectrum, someone's moderation is always situational, and the further one is away from the center, the more any move away from one's position seems extreme. Hence, the likelihood that people might confuse socialism with communism, or occasionally the center-right with fascism. I'll wait to spell out further the differences between those in a different video though. For now, I hope to have made clear the basics of the left and right-wing positions.